Hello everyone. So from now on, all of the videos, I will post 2 videos every day on this channel, and today I'm actually gonna post 3 because of my gaming video, which I'm gonna be doing as my last video of today. Anyways, this is the first one, the final part of the English Monarchs timeline. But don't worry, we have a long list of monarchs left. So don't worry, we will also do some popes after this. So let us begin. Once again, brought to you by the talent of artist himself, the English Monarchs Timeline Part 4. The first one born during this time period was George Louis, later known as George I. Born in Hanover to Ernest Augustus and Sophia of Hanover, George inherited the titles and lands of the Duchy of Brunswick-Luneburg from his father and uncles. A succession of European wars expanded George's German domains during his lifetime. He was ratified as Prince Elect of Hanover in 1708. He became an adult in 1680, and then afterwards he married Sophia Dorothea of Celli. And during this time period, George Augustus was born. He was later known as George II, of course, succeeding George Louis. As the senior Protestant descendant of his great-grandfather James VI and First, George inherited the British throne following the deaths in 1714 of his mother, Sophia, and his second cousin Anne, Queen of Great Britain. And then he divorced Sophia Dorothea of Celli. And he was single for a while. And during this time period, George Augustus married Caroline of Ansbach. Oh, he actually didn't marry anyone else afterwards. Anyways, Jacobites attempted, but failed, to depose George and replace him with James Francis Edward Stuart, Anne's Catholic half-brother. During George's reign, the powers of the monarchy diminished, and Britain began a transition to the modern system of cabinet government led by a prime minister. That prime minister first being Robert Walpole. And it has continued ever since. Robert Walpole was Britain's first prime minister, like I just said. And this marked the beginning of the House of Hanover, which began after George's cousin Queen Anne died. As king from 1727, George II exercised later control over British domestic policy, which was largely controlled by the Parliament of Great Britain. As elector, he spent 12 summers in Hanover, where he had more direct control over government policy. He had a difficult relationship with his eldest son, Frederick, who supported the parliamentary opposition. By the way, did you know that Robert Walpole had the longest premiership of any prime minister? I know this isn't a prime minister timeline, we'll do that soon, but I just wanted to give you some little facts about other world leaders, even though I'm not talking about those. Anyways, the Battle of Culloden was on the 16th of April 1746, when George II was 62 years old. Supporters of the Catholic claimant to the British throne, James Francis Edward Stuart, led by James's son, attempted and failed to depose George in the last of the Jacobite rebellions in 1745. Prince Frederick suddenly died in 1751 before his father, and George was succeeded by Frederick's eldest son, George III. He would later go on to be the longest reigning male monarch of in British history. He is actually the third longest reigning monarch in British history as a whole. His the two longest being Queen Victoria and Queen Elizabeth II. Early in George I's reign, Great Britain defeated France in the Seven Years' War, becoming the dominant European power in North America and India. However, Britain lost 13 of its North American colonies in the American War of Independence. And during this, the American Revolutionary War was between April 19th, 1775 to September 3rd, 1783. And during this time period, George Augustus Frederick and William Henry were getting into their teenage years. Anyways, further wars against revolutionary Napoleonic France from 1793 concluded in the defeat of Napoleon at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. In 1807, the transatlantic slave trade was banned from the British Empire. And people still done lots of stuff with slavery afterwards. But it was to ban those. And I love that, since I absolutely hate slavery. And sadly, some countries still have slavery. I want those countries to ban slavery. Those are mostly in Africa, but some of them are also in Asia. Anyways, in the later part of his life, George had recurrent and eventually permanent mental illness. The exact nature of the mental illness is not known definitively, but historians and medical experts have suggested that symptoms and behavior traits are consistent with either bipolar disorder or porphyria. Anyways, the Battle of Trafalgar was on the 21st of October 1805. And don't you even start about this age during the battle. The Battle of Waterloo was on June 18th, 1815. And I don't know how George III got through that, since he was in his the early part of his late 70s. And he lived extremely long for his time. Anyways, George IV's rule was tarnished by scandal and financial extravagance. His ministers found his behavior selfish, unreliable and irresponsible, and he was strongly influenced by favourites. His brother William had no surviving legitimate children at the time of his death, so he was succeeded by his niece Victoria, who was first named Alexandrina Victoria. The coronation of Queen Victoria was on June 28, 1838, when she was just 19 years old. Anyways, Victoria inherited the throne aged 18 after her father's three elder brothers died without surviving legitimate issue. Victoria, a constitutional monarch, attempted privately to influence government policy and ministerial appointments. Publicly, she became a national icon who was identified with strict standards of personal morality. And during this time period, Albert Edward was born, who would later become known as Edward VII. The Great Exhibition was between the 1st of May and the 15th of October 1851. After Albert's death in 1861, Victoria plunged into deep mourning and avoided public appearances. As a result of her seclusion, British republicanism temporarily gained strength, but in the latter half of her reign, her popularity recovered. And during this time period, George Frederick Ernest Albert was born. The Victorian era was a period of industrial, political, scientific, and military change within the United Kingdom, and was marked by a great expansion of the British Empire. And during this time period, George Frederick Ernest Albert married Mary of Teck, and both Edward and Albert were born. The death of Victoria was on the 20th of January 1901. Thus marking the end of the House of Hanover and the beginning of the short-lived House of Saxe, Coburg and Gotha. Anyways, the Edwardian era, which covered Edward's reign and was named after him, coincided with the start of a new century and heralded significant changes in technology and society, including steam turbine propulsion and the rise of socialism. Oh, I thought the House of Saxe, Coburg and Gotha ended with Edward VII dying. Anyways, the declaration of war was on the 4th of August 1914. But luckily, Edward's wife Alexandra lived for a few years after. Oh, so the House of Windsor began during George's involvement in World War One. Anyways, George's reign saw the rise of socialism, communism, fascism, Irish republicanism, and the Indian independence movement, all of which radically changed the political landscape of the British Empire, which itself reached its territorial peak by the beginning of the 1920s. A few months after Alexandra's death, the one and only Queen Elizabeth II was born. Buckingham Palace was bombed during the Blitz while the King and Queen were there, and his younger brother, the Duke of Kent, was killed on active service. George became known as a symbol of British determination to win the war. Anyways, speaking of the London Blitz, it happened between the 7th of September 1940 to the 11th of May 1941. By the way, did you know that Winston Churchill wasn't the only Prime Minister during the war? There is also another one by the name of Neville Chamberlain, but I think half of you already knew that, or a tiny bit more than half. Anyways, the coronation of the one and only Queen Elizabeth II was on the 2nd of June, 1953. That's actually my favourite day of British royalty. Anyways, Elizabeth reigned as a constitutional monarch through major political changes such as the Troubles in Northern Ireland, the evolution of the United Kingdom, the decolonisation of Africa, and the United Kingdom's accession to the European communities as well as its subsequent withdrawal. The wedding of Prince Charles and Diana Spence was on July 29, 1981, but they divorced a year before Diana's death. As Queen, Elizabeth was served by more than 170 prime ministers across her realms. Her many historic visits and meetings include state visits to China in 1986, to Russia in 1994, and to the Republic of Ireland in 2011, and meeting with 5 popes and 14 US presidents. I never knew that Charles preferred girls' common looks during the end of the previous century. Anyways, the wedding of Prince William and Catherine Middleton was on April 29th, 2011. By the way, if you're wondering why they aren't included in here, that's because they haven't been monarchs yet, of course, and Prince William is actually not even in the line of the throne anymore, I think. We've heard all about it on the news, haven't we, guys? Anyways, significant events included Elizabeth's coronation in 1953 and the celebrations of her silver, golden, diamond, and platinum jubilees. She died aged 96 at Balmoral Castle and succeeded by her eldest son, Charles III. Rest in peace to the glorious Elizabeth II. Anyways, speaking of her, she died on September 8th, 2022. And yes, this was made in last year. But it doesn't really matter since this still is what it looks like in the present day. Anyways, thanks for watching everyone. Please like and subscribe to both my channels. This one and my other one called A Sense of Issue 2. Not forcing. Oh, and also on this channel, I'm trying to get to 250 subs and not 11,000, not 12,000, not 13,000, not even 14,000, but 15,000 views before summer. And on the other channel, 25 subs and 1,000 views before summer. Just to change you guys at home. Not forcing for any of those either. Also, I'm going to be doing some local store tours near me soon, so look over those posts. Bye everyone, see you in a few minutes for my pop upload on this channel. Peace out.